My name is Stuart McCulloch, and I'm one of the Cyber Essentials assessors with jisc. These slides are on Cyber Essentials and the changes that have now come into effect with the new question set, which is the new Evendine question set. So what we're going to talk about is what has changed. So there is this new Evendine question set that was released on the 24th of January. And it contains the biggest changes in Cyber Essentials since its release in 2014. Do find a wee link there that does take you to the self-assessment questions, just so you have that to hand. That's quite handy to have. So in the following slides ahead, we will go through the new changes that has now taken effect and outline the several new changes that has been released for this new Evendine question set. The first of which is that there is now a cost increase in completing the new Evendine question set. It was originally a flat-out fee for the Beacon question set of 300 plus VAT, but IASME are now basing the cost on the size of the organisation. For this sector, there will be two main organisation sizes that the price will be based on. The first of which being between 50 and 249 employees, and one that will apply to most is 250 plus employees. These new prices now include 1 hour of advice and guidance with ourselves, with one of our Cyber Essentials assessors. And this is to go through the changes and be good to kind of see a good gap analysis of where you are from the previous question set to this one and what you need to do going forward. The next change, probably one of the biggest ones within the new question set, is the inclusion of cloud services. So what is a cloud service and how do I know what should be included? It is a service, whether it is paid for or free, that you have control over and who has access over and have admin access over that cloud service. If your data is held on a cloud service, then they are going to typically be in scope. This includes things like Microsoft Office 365, Google Workspace, QuickBooks, and even Dropbox. So this includes everything to do with IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS. This has been included as users have to make changes and disable any services that are not used. And due to the increased risk and attack surface of cloud services, it needs to be ensured that everything down to the user's control is configured correctly and that CE controls are applied to the cloud services in the same way as everything else. Therefore, taking responsibility for the user access control and the secure configuration of their services, which would include securely managing access to the different administration accounts and blocking accounts that you no longer need. Also, you need to ensure that there are also your separate global admin accounts from your standard user accounts on cloud services in the same way as you do for your local accounts. The applicant is always responsible for ensuring that all the controls are implemented against the cloud service. But due to the shared responsibility of some cloud services, some of these controls will be implemented by the cloud service provider. Where the cloud service provider implements a control, the applicant must satisfy themselves that this has been done by the cloud provider, committing to implementation within contractual clauses or documents referenced by contract, such as security statements or privacy statements. Cloud providers will often explain how they implement security in documents published in their trust centers, such as Microsoft Office 365, which will include reference to a shared responsibility model. Within the submission for the cloud services for these controls, it is not sufficient to state X company is managing this service as an answer. You need to clearly state how that is enforced between yourselves and that cloud service provider, ensure that those controls are met by them. The next big change is around multi-factor authentication. The same way it has always been, all administrators of a cloud service must have multi-factor authentication enabled. This has always been the case right from the Beacon question set and is still a must or a requirement for the Evendine question set. There is now an addition of a question asking if MFA has been enabled for all users. This is an information-only question until January 2023. ASME are giving everyone advance notice of this change to be able to implement it and roll it out to all users within the year to be compliant for the next renewal. If you don't have MFA enabled for all users of the cloud service in scope, do put a project in place to roll this out to everyone as soon as possible, rather than waiting until you renew again. As of January 2023, this will be marked upon. So if you're renewing next year, all users must have MFA applied. This does include students as well as staff. There is no exception to the accounts being used on the cloud service.
For people with learning difficulties or other methods of multi-factor authentication that can be implemented, there are other options available. For example, you can utilize things like smart card readers, YubiKeys, all in place of your one-time passcodes. And so if a cloud service does not provide you with that multi-factor authentication, there is alternative methods that can be utilized. The link provided on screen gives you 5 different options in there. Only the first 4 are acceptable multi-factor authentication methods for Cyber Essentials. The last option, using another piece of knowledge as an extra factor, is not compliant for Cyber Essentials. So do take a look at that link and have a look at those 4 options and see which may be acceptable for you to utilize for your cloud services for multi-factor authentication. You can also utilize Azure Application Proxy and have the cloud service hosted behind this in order to utilize your Azure or Microsoft 365 multi-factor authentication for that cloud service, and that would be an acceptable method of applying MFA to a cloud service that may not have it.
The next section will cover BYOD, or personally owned devices, and what is required within the submission. BYOD gets called out and specifically mentioned a lot more now within the Evendine question set. So when is a personal device to be included within the submission? If a staff member uses their personal desktop, laptop, mobile, or tablet to access organizational data and services, they need to be included in the submission and on the same level of detail as the corporately provided devices. If they're used to access their email, Office 365, Google Workspace, regardless of which network a device may use, such as EduRoam, 3G, 4G, 5G, public Wi-Fi, or home Wi-Fi, they need to be listed. If you do a limited subset scope, it is only the devices used by the staff encompassed within that scope that you need to list, both corporate and personal devices. BYOD, or personal device inclusion, applies only to those staff or accounts in scope, not all your staff BYOD personal devices. So what is required to be listed? We need to make a model of all desktops, laptops, mobile phones, and tablets. This is to ensure that the devices themselves are still supported by the manufacturer. For example, Dell Vostro 5525, Surface Pro 7, MacBook Pro, Samsung Galaxy S22, and iPad Pro 3rd Gen. We also need the operating system. We need the edition and build of Windows 10. So for example, Windows 10 Education 21H1. With macOS, just whatever version the operating system is. So it could be Big Sur or Monterey. Chrome OS, we need the version of that as well. And the same with iOS and Android. Please just list the versions that they're currently on, but do make sure that they are supported by the manufacturer and the vendor prior to submitting your submission. Which leads us on to the next bit. So check official sites for each vendor to ensure the operating systems you're listing and using are still supported, and do vet that list of devices before submitting your submission, as any device that is not supported by the manufacturer will result in a fail, and the same for an unsupported operating system. This is for both corporately provided and personally owned devices. The list can be summarized, or you can upload a CSV file of the devices within the portal. Do use pivot tables where you can, just to summarize this a bit more within the submission itself. Do distinguish which is corporately provided and which is personally owned, so we know that BYOD has been included in the device list. There are some devices that you don't need to list within the submission, mainly around mobile phone devices. So if a mobile device is solely used for calling, texting, multi-factor authentication, such as SMS code, phone code, or an authenticator app, these devices do not need to be declared. Only devices that are accessing organizational data and services need to be listed. So if they do access email or any other data or services of your own, they need to be listed within the submission alongside your corporately provided devices.
Do you need a BYOD policy? In short, yes, you must have a well-written BYOD policy. It must be read by your staff, stating the necessary controls that they must adhere to. Throughout the submission, you must make reference to personally owned devices and what you have in place for that particular control to be applied to those devices. Whilst a strong written policy around BYOD or personal devices is great to help staff understand all the Cyber Essentials requirements, BYOD still needs to be listed alongside corporate devices. Do you need to have a technical control for BYOD? It is expected within Cyber Essentials to apply the controls to mobile devices technically, making use of Intune or another MDM solution for both your corporately provided devices as well as BYOD or personally owned devices. There is also a free version within Microsoft 365 that can be utilized if your licensing doesn't allow the use of Intune. This is called Basic Mobility and Security, which needs to be enabled within Microsoft 365 in order to be utilized or used. A technical control such as conditional access can be used to state minimum operating system requirements, so devices that do not meet that requirement will get blocked straight away unless they update their device. Large organizations should be using an MDM solution or some sort of technical control to manage all devices, ensuring you have good asset management as well as that technical ability to enforce the relevant controls upon devices. The reason for having this technical control over the devices is to ensure you are fully aware of all devices connecting into your infrastructure and ensuring that they all meet the necessary requirements and are fully supported in order to access your organizational data and services.
The next section is around the firmware of devices that are within scope.
You now have to declare the makes and models of all desktops, laptops, as well as your mobiles and tablets, alongside the operating system that is running on each of them, both for your corporately provided devices and your personally owned devices. This is to ensure that firmware is being updated on the devices and are therefore still supported by the manufacturer. While this is the case, if we see anything that is obviously end of life, we will make an advisory to say, please consider replacing this device. It is not currently a requirement to completely replace those devices in order to be compliant for Cyber Essentials, but it always has been the case for mobiles and tablet devices. This is still a requirement to list the makes and models and ensure that they are supported by the relevant manufacturer. The next section is around homeworking and the requirements for a homeworker within Cyber Essentials. So a homeworker is defined within Cyber Essentials as being any employee contracted or legally required to work from home for any period of time at the time of the assessment. So anybody within that bracket will need to be classified as a home worker and working from home for Cyber Essentials. Any employees that are allowed to work from home should be considered as home workers. If they have flexible working in their contracts that would allow their place of work to be remote from the office, they then should be considered as home workers. If they have full-time contracts to work on location but unexpectedly work from home due to an emergency or on an ad hoc basis, then they do not need to be included as a home worker.
Home routers are no longer in scope, and do not need to be listed in a submission for home workers. It was previously a requirement to list these and ensure default passwords, etc., were changed to something complex, but they no longer need to be listed as part of the submission anymore. So what is now the firewall boundary for home workers? One boundary method is that their boundary is now their software firewall, and you must ensure that this is enabled for home workers on both corporately provided and personally owned devices. Alternatively, if a corporately provided VPN is supplied and set up to connect from home, this therefore transfers their boundary to the company firewall. The VPNs need to be full or single tunnel access only and always on. Finally, if you provide or supply the home workers with a router for use at home, this will be in scope and needs to be declared. You'll need to list the make and model of the router and ensure in the relevant firewall questions the default password has been changed on the device to something complex. The next section is about legacy software and systems. You must ensure that all unsupported or legacy software is removed from devices and segregated away from the rest of the network with no inbound or outbound internet connection. This will be an information-only question from the start and will be officially assessed from January 2023. All other software, the applicant must ensure that the software is updated and that you install any high-risk or critical security patches for operating systems and software. Anything with a CVSS version 3 score of 7 and above is classified as high risk and critical and must be applied within 14 days of release. The next section is a new one added within the Evendine question set around device locking, ensuring that devices are locked with biometrics, a password, or PIN code. Where a device requires the physical presence of a user to gain access to the services the device offers, example, laptop log on, mobile phone unlock, the user must unlock the device using a credential such as biometric, a password, or a PIN code before gaining access to the services. Biometrics, passwords, and PINs must be protected against brute force attack by at least one of the following options. One of those is throttling the rate of attempts. This means the time the user must wait between attempts increases with each unsuccessful attempt. This should permit no more than 10 guesses within 5 minutes. Second option is locking devices after no more than 10 unsuccessful attempts. Technical controls must be used to manage the quality of credentials. If credentials are solely to unlock a device, a minimum password or PIN length of at least 6 characters can be used. When the device unlocking credentials are used elsewhere, then the full password requirements for user access control must be applied to the credentials. The next section is password-based authentication. This has now been expanded upon within the new question set and encompasses being able to apply complex and non-guessable passwords. This is about the use of different methods around brute force protection, such as the use of MFA and the use of password deny list, and ensuring that unsuccessful logins or guess attempts are blocked after a certain amount of attempts. Technical controls should be used to manage the quality of passwords, and this will include one of the following. Using multi-factor authentication in conjunction with a password of at least 8 characters with no maximum length restrictions. Second option, a minimum password of at least 12 characters with no maximum length restrictions. And the third option is a minimum password length of at least 8 characters with no maximum length restrictions, and the use of automatic blocking of common passwords using a deny list. So that kind of brings us to the end of what's included within Evendine. On this slide, we'll have some useful links. We have our drop-in clinic, our prepare for certification for Cyber Essentials, and what Cyber Essentials is all about, and a list to where you can get a download of the question sets, extra information on multi-factor authentication, BYOD, and device firmware as well. So that concludes the Evendine update. Do utilize ourselves here at JISC. We're here to help. We're here to help you through the submissions, give you advice and guidance, and do let us know to your account managers or professional services how we can be of assistance and help you through your submissions.